Let's just start with the history on Black River. This is a slide from a presentation to the council in October of 2018. Black River was originally purchased by the West Morris School District, 45 acres in 1967 for $1. Now, keep in mind, if it's owned by the West Morris School District, who's in the West Morris School District? The two Chesters, the two Mendhams, and Washington Township. From 1967 until 2018, that is who owned Black River. The problem with Black River was, because the township didn't own it, the township didn't want to make any long-term improvements because we're spending our money on somebody else's property. And the lease says, anything we do to the property, if the lease expires, the Board of Education owns the improvements. So there was hesitation to put township money into a property either we didn't own, and we were just going forward on a bunch of short-term 5-year type leases. We didn't know what the school board was going to do with it, because the school board is subject to turnover as well. I'll tell you this, just stepping aside for the moment. I always had more of a libertarian bent about government. After being on the inside, absolutely. You don't know what they're going to do from time to time. And when boards meet once a month and change every year or every 2 years, things change. And that's it with the school board as well. So there was no predictability if we spent a ton of money on Black River, that they wouldn't do something to take it out from under us. So that's why improvements were not made. The fields are located in the Highlands Preservation Area. Without getting too much into the weeds on Highlands, for those who don't know the Highlands, there are areas that the Highlands protects, and then there are areas that the Highlands really protects. The preservation area is pretty much off limits to anybody except certain statutorily enumerated entities for specific purposes. One of those entities is a school district. So anything that has to be done to the Black River, just as a footnote going forward, has to be done while it's still owned by the school district. If Chester bought it outright, we couldn't do anything to it. Because the township is not one of those qualifying entities that can walk into the Highlands and say, here's what we want to do. So therefore, you want to leave the property in the name of the school district. With that aside, look at the 2001 lease, the 2010 lease. Just as an example, commenced January 1st, 2010 and January 1st, 2015. Now, the problem here was there was an option. Could be extended for an additional 5 years upon written agreement of the parties. And that written agreement must take place at least in the last year of the then current lease. Must take place prior. So you got to do it at least a year prior to 2015 if you wanted to do that written agreement to extend. Now, in any contract, the parties can always sit down and say, yeah, that's what it says. We both agree we're going to do something different. That didn't happen, nor did the written extension. About 3 years in, the town, or the Board of Education, and I'm not even going to go into this, but they were building their third artificial turf stadium, decided they needed more money, and then getting Black River off their balance sheet was probably an easy way to raise a significant amount of money. So they started making noise, started looking at it, came back to the township, said, wait a second, guys, we don't have a written extension. Now, I wasn't involved, I wasn't on the council, I don't know what the nature of the discussions were after that, but what ultimately came of it was then the Board of Education said, we want to sell it. I've been told, but have not confirmed, that the Board of Education rattled the saber that if we didn't buy it, they were going to sell it to some private developer. It's in the Highlands Preservation Area. I don't know what a developer was going to do. Maybe a developer works out some deal. But I don't think it would have had a very good optic if the Board of Education sold it out from under the township. Just a thought. In any event, that's where it started. So, since we didn't have a written agreement, as I understand it, the board also referred to paragraph C, which says, well, since we don't have an agreement, that means we could cancel the lease at any time. So, from what I understand, the Board of Education was playing a little bit of hardball. Not going to comment whether that's a good idea or not. Apparently they did. And so, there really was only one option left. Buy the fields. Okay. In that context, in 2014, there was a 4 towns recreation plan that was done by the state of New Jersey under a grant, which looked at the Mendons and the Chesters and said, taking those together and looking at all of the recreational services that are provided by the towns, what are the best practices to do this? And this document's about 120 pages, so we're definitely not going through the whole thing. But the highlight is they really focused in on Black River, because they recognized in this study that Black River was really a jewel for the 4 towns in terms of future recreational services. In their analysis, they said Black River Fields are the best sports venues for the purposes within the Chester Township system. I think that's true. Chubb Park is a very good park, but Chubb Park is subject to many restrictions because it was donated to the township as part of an estate, and in the deed there are many restrictions on what can and cannot be done at Chubb Park. But they went on to point out in this study that Black River remains in an unimproved state due to the circumstances that neither the township nor area sports associations are willing to invest in improvements without assistance of long-term control of the site. Back to either we get a long-term lease or we're not doing anything. The practice field is an extremely valuable resource and should be secured from the Board of Education for conversion to develop fields. So far, so good. We're on track. Here's where things start to get a little falling apart. It talks about a regional master plan for the 4 towns. Unfortunately, this idea, from the best I can tell, died in 2014. It did not get picked up. It did not get examined in the context of buying Black River. It did not get examined in the context of what can we do on a consolidated basis. And again, remember the point I originally made. Chester Township, 5 entities in West Morris School District. We own a part of the fields indirectly already. So there was no regional master plan developed. Says one of the potentials for systematic development is a wholly responsive, they get paid by the word, I think. Regional responsive regional park is prominent in the 4 towns' inventory of sites. It is the combined site encompassing Black River Middle School, Black River Fields, Black River Practice Fields, the Highlands Ridge Park, which is across the street from Black River, and potentially a portion of recently acquired lands in the former Lucent parcel. The group of tracks is distinctive in so many potentials that only an unrestricted Chubb Park could be similarly useful. Unrestricted in the sense of what I said before, Chubb Park has many deep restrictions on what can be done. And again, this entire report I will upload, you can read it yourself. I will include the highlights so you can find what we're referring to later. Now, apparently at the time in 2014, a YMCA had, I don't know which one, expressed an interest in putting something in the vicinity. It goes on to wax poetic about why Black River is such a good thing and why it should be developed on a regional basis. Executive actions, the recommendations they made, It is recommended that the administrations of Chester Borough, Chester Township, Mendon Borough, and Mendon Township, the four towns, agree to join their resources and consolidate their planning for joint future management of programming of primary outdoor recreation activities, thereby enabling a four towns process. Presuming a common cause is recognized and that commitment is at the level of the four municipal administrations to purposefully share their resources is gained, much immediate relief of system problems can be achieved by equitably balancing the use of existing resources. Success in this enterprise is almost entirely contingent upon the will of current administrations as their unified acceptance of a changed paradigm for recreation delivery, as well as commitment to direct executive action to enable necessary management and reorganization underlies the concept. Specific to Black River, it is recommended that the four towns identify and inventory existing irregular or non-compliant conditions occurring on and adjacent to existing outdoor sports fields, playfields system-wide, and prioritize a sequence of improvements to eliminate those conditions. So essentially, cutting to the chase, this report in 2014 recommended that we take a cohesive approach to work within the four towns at minimum to plan out what are we doing on recreation and how are we going to fund it. Unfortunately, as best I can tell, this report is posted online, it's posted on the township website, but it is not getting any attention that I am aware of in that context. With respect to Black River, if we go back to March of 2017, this is when the idea started about potentially buying and incidentally, these are all documents that are available on the township website, so I'm not telling tales out of school. The Black River lease was addressed by the town council. Ms. Collins explained that the lease was approved in 2014, but never formally signed. The regional high school district has reached out to the township to address the lease. Mr. Szymanski, the town attorney, recommended not signing the lease that is retroactive to 2015, but instead renegotiate a new start date. There was public comment on it. The current mayor, stated that she would meet with the superintendent as a next step as to what to do from there. So this goes back to what I said earlier. We had a lease. There were some problems with what happened in both the lease, at least as indicated here. The original lease may not have been signed, but at minimum, that extension beyond 2015 had not been signed. And now in 2017, the school district is looking at, we want to build our turf fields and we need money. The township never signed the lease. That means we can sell the property. That was pretty much, as far as I can tell, the thinking on the part of the Board of Education. Move forward to the town council meeting in September of 2017. Mrs. Spinelli asked for an update on the purchase of the Black River Fields. Mayor Asdal stated she was notified by the superintendent that it was a Board of Education goal to resolve the status of the Black River Fields by the end of the year. Again, this is 2017. Mayor Asdal was meeting with a two-person committee. I don't know who was the two-person committee at the time. A serious offer should be provided by the end of the year, and then she reviewed the recent discussions of the Black River Subcommittee. So here we are in September. It's now moving forward. Okay, what can we do? In October, there is a closed session meeting where there is a discussion on the agenda for property acquisition, Black River Fields. At the end of the closed session, it came out of closed, and there was a motion made to start negotiations with the Board of Education for the purchase of Black River Fields. So, October 2017, the fuse starts with respect to potential purchase. In November 2017, the acquisition is again discussed in closed session. There was no action taken out of closed. September, 11/21. Again, being discussed in closed, no particular action taken out of closed. Then, in January of 2017, there's an appraisal done. Piecing this together, I assume the Board of Education was taking the position that they needed to sell the property for fair market value, so a fair market value analysis was undertaken. The estimated value of the property as of January 3rd, 2018 was $832,000. That's the fair market value. I won't comment on should we have bought it, shouldn't we have bought it for fair market value. This is what happened. I'm just sticking to the facts. However, once we knew what the price was going to be, there was an opportunity, and we've already initiated that process, for applying for funds through the County Open Space Trust to help reimburse a part of the purchase price. The rules for applying for open space money allow you to apply. You do not need a signed contract. You can apply on a verbal commitment with the contract potentially to follow later. There's a deadline every June to apply for funding. That application then is heard over the next several months, and a decision is made in mid-November. We have applied, but we did not apply until last year, which meant the first payment in June of 2018 and the second payment in June and July of 2018 and 2019 did not qualify. I cannot offer any explanation as to why we didn't apply sooner, but once we knew the purchase price in beginning of 2018, there was about a 5-month period before there was a deadline to apply for 2018. Even if we could not get the application in for the first payment, we could have applied for 3 payments. As it is, we're only applying for 2 payments. We should find out after the election, in I think November 13th or thereabout, how much they will give us on the $400,000 that we have applied for. So, if you look at the timing of this, we could have applied for $800. We're applying for $400. It is what it is. March 2017, the Black River Fields lease is again being discussed. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, my list is out of order. I'm out of order. February 6th of 2018. Black River Fields is yet a subject. Closed. No action taken out of closed. So the process is continuing. April 3rd, 2018. Apparently a contract for the sale has been tossed back and forth. The town attorney, Mr. Szymanski, had reviewed the lease, or the purchase agreement, and issues that had to be addressed. I keep calling it a lease. Here's the way it was structured. It's called a lease with a purchase 4-year term. Starts July 2018, first payment in 4 equal installments made at the inception. Each installment thereafter is every July. It goes for 4 years. There are 2 one-year options to extend the lease after that. During that period of time, once the 4 payments are made, we can ask to have title passed to us. Why was it done that way? I think both from a financial standpoint, because by spreading it out, we did not overburden. This is being paid through a separate trust fund, the open space trust fund in the township. You pay a separate open space tax in your tax bill. That money goes to that trust fund. This money is being used to purchase the fields. Whatever can't be paid out of what was in the bank or coming in from the taxes will be paid by the issuance of a bond. So that's how we're paying for it. Spread that out over the 4 years, the 2 one-year options. One of the reasons also I believe that it was spread out was to allow the development of the fields. Now, we spent a lot of time looking at this as a council, and as you're probably aware, we approved improvements to the fields up to $2.4 million for grass fields. There are 3 phases to the Black River development. Phase 1 was the parking lot. That was $200,000 to accommodate more parking. If you've been to Black River, you know what I'm talking about. That's pretty much done. Phase 2 are 2 very large grass fields that will be leveled out. Irrigation systems will be installed, so they will be irrigated. And the cost of doing all of that, now, for those who are concerned, there are no lights on phase 2, but we have approved up to $2.4 million to do that. We have approved what work will be done 2A, the first big block of the grass fields. 2B, we have not formally approved what will be done there yet, but it's pretty much the same thing as 2A. There is some discussion, do we do them both at the same time or do them in a staggered way? The staggered issue is if we do it staggered, we can do 2A. We're still playing on what would be 2B. When 2A is playable, we move there and work on 2B. Problem with that is, even if we put sod in, which we've approved for 2A, you're still looking at about a year to a year and a half, if everything goes right, that you can play on those fields. If we seed 2B, that's a year and a half to 2 years if everything goes right, till the grass grows enough that you can play on. Put the 2 together, we may go outside that 4-year time frame. We have the 2 one-year options. That, in a nutshell, is the plan for the Black River fields. But going back to our historical progress, April 17th, we're still in contract negotiations and closed. May, the question is raised, and Mayor Asdell, there's a statement that the Black River Fields Subcommittee is being formed. It will meet on May 15th to discuss some possible grants. And then Mayor Asdell said something about a meeting with Governor Murphy. I don't know that that was related to the Black River Fields. And then the matter is discussed, the contract negotiations are discussed in closed again. May 9th, the mayor reviewed the recent discussions with the West Morris Regional High School District for purchase of the facility. Matrix of decision points, she and members of the Parks Subcommittee. Don't know who that was. I don't believe it was the entire Parks Committee, but it was some subcommittee that the mayor formed that evaluated what to do going forward. Subcommittee members discussed funding options, including selling naming rights to the field, and then it was agreed the township attorney should review. So once we know we're purchasing the fields, how are we going to fund them? What are we going to do to improve them? Is the next topic that's creeping into the discussions. Now, this is the Black River Subcommittee. I should point out. which included Mayor Asdal, the Township engineer, Mr. Bragg at the time, he was not a council member yet. And so these were the discussions that were being had by that subcommittee. The engineering report, the township engineer, because we're in the Highlands, township should pursue an exemption. That's how you get it done, through the school district, while it's still under the ownership of the school district. Plans have been approved by various other people. The Highlands exemption applications are in process. The town engineer was preparing the application that would be submitted to the DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, which had the authority to grant the exemption to the Highlands development. Basically, the DEP held the keys as to whether we could or could not develop. But we were going to the DEP under the auspices, the property is owned by the school district gets what's called exemption number 6, by which they can develop it or it can be developed in their name. Mr. Hanson talked about exemption number 6. He also talked about exemption number 4. I'm not going to go there. I think that's been problematic, but it may not apply. Both these exemptions would be approved by the DEP. Mr. Hanson apparently told us once the township owns the property, a far more onerous capital improvement process would have to be implemented in order to make any improvements. So as of May 9th, there's discussion of how we're going to fund this. In the management of the process, Mr. Johnston, one of the subcommittee members, talked about the lease extensions, specifically if we're not able to complete the construction in the 4 years. Mr. Hanson advised the engineer that the projects underway need to be 100% completed before the township takes ownership. I'm not sure that statement is correct as things have played out. The determination should be made now as to how many phases it will take to complete that work. So now we're talking about how do we do what we want to do. The question is, what do we want to do? Now, putting green, the portions in green, you will see, and what we're going to get to as a preview is there was ultimately an application submitted to the DEP. The problem with that application was it did not match what we actually intended to do. So here we are, May 9th. Mr. Hanson stated that a turf field, artificial turf field, should break ground by June 2021. The potential for lighting the turf field and possibly the grass fields were being discussed. Design would have to begin in June 2021 in order to allow time for bidding over that winter. So the project being discussed at this point, May 9th, 2018, is 2 grass fields and a third portion with an artificial turf and lights, and potentially lighting either both or at least one of the grass fields. Again, May 2018. Goes on to discuss Mr. Folsch. Mr. Folsch is the township's parks consultant. He said it should be decided whether a turf field would be mostly reserved for youth or it would be rented out to create more revenue. A artificial turf field is definitively being discussed for phase 3 on May 9, 2018. They go on to discuss various options to fund this. Mayor Asdal, who was present, clarified the township will fund the purchase, buying the fields, and make safety improvements, but her point was the field improvements will be at the cost of the users. I think what she was referencing, and as this ultimately played out, is the grass improvements, the $2.4 million, we're paying for. The turf and lights, the artificial turf and lights, has been covered numerous times since then, and the statements have always been, if that's going to happen, it has to be 100% paid for by private sports teams. Ms. Folsch advised Green Acres funding, and Ms. Collins noted that all funding must be in place to award a bid for our project. Roles and responsibilities. Councilman Dragg, again, was not on the council yet at the time, but he was interfacing with the sports teams. Mr. Dragg was advised to communicate with the organizations to begin fundraising. Mayor Asdell stated that she would contact the councilman again in regard to setting up a community fund to fund what was anticipated for the artificial turf and lights. The communication protocol. Communication will be through email, and documents will be shared through Google Drive. Subcommittee meetings are not subject to the Open Public Meetings Act. However, email communications are subject to the Open Public Meetings Act. At this time, the subcommittee was meeting. I'm unclear on how much public notice there was given at that time about these meetings, but they are discussing how they will communicate internally, and the subsequent meeting is scheduled. The council meets 2 weeks later. Again, contract negotiations for Black River are still ongoing. This is on May 23rd. And what I'd like to point out, if you go through the minutes of that meeting, there is nothing to reflect that there was any discussion about what would be submitted to the DEP in the application. There's nothing in the minutes. Again, I wasn't on council at the time. Was it discussed and closed? Perhaps. But there does not appear anything of public record that indicates that the council approved an application or the form of an application. We go to June 5th, 2018. This is the engineer submitting the proposal to the DEP. Remember what was being discussed? Turf, lights. Here is the plan. Instead of 2 natural turf fields and a third artificial, this plan is for, and I didn't circle the first one, but you've got this one, natural turf, natural turf, natural turf, natural turf. An extended parking lot that is designated as parking / sports area, and then a 5th natural turf field. If we're talking 2 grass fields and a phase 3 of a turf field, this is 5 grass fields, no lights, and no artificial turf. If you go further into the application, it says that existing wastewater flow to remain unchanged. No wastewater is to be generated from this proposed project. As it later turned out, there was discussion that the septic might need to be expanded if lights were installed because of the increased use that might require. Most significantly, however, in this application, proposed water supply source. There was one well that serviced Black River. It says here, existing water supply to remain unchanged. Translated, no new wells. Commercial or industrial wells, 0. Irrigation wells, none indicated. So this is a proposal for 5 grass fields with an expanded parking lot, no lights, no wells, no expanded septic. Apply for under exemption number 6 through the school district. If you go on through it, you'll see that the school district signs off. There's a council meeting the following day, June 6th. There is nothing in the minutes to indicate that this proposal was discussed at all with the council. Go to June 7th, the Black River Subcommittee. Mr. Hanson, the Township engineer, who was present at the prior meetings in May when artificial turf and lights were being discussed, is also present at this meeting. Mr. Hanson is the individual who prepared the application that we just looked at. In this meeting, Mr. Hansen stated as part of the subcommittee meeting, again, this is 2 days after he submitted the application to the DEP with the 5 grass fields. Mr. Hansen stated that exemption number 6 has been filed with the DEP. In addition, a request was filed with the health department to ensure that the increase in the parking lot does not create an issue for the current septic system. He just told them there was no septic issue with the DEP. Now he's telling us, he's requesting the health department to clarify that there isn't a septic issue. Phase 1 is anticipated to cost $200,000. Again, that's the parking lot improvements. Mr. Hansen is currently working on creating cost estimates for phase 2, which may be split into A and 2B, the 2 grass field blocks. This would encompass the improvement of the natural turf fields and the removal of brush. I've highlighted in green, the portions in green are what contradict the DEP application. Mr. Hansen refers to phase 3 as the creation of the artificial turf fields, which is estimated to cost $1.3 billion. I just told the DEP it's 5 grass fields, 2 days earlier. Mr. Hansen proposed 400-foot by 500-foot boxes. Mr. Hansen, Mr. Folch, and Mr. Dragg have discussed whether there should be 2 or 3 of these boxes, so on and so forth. Mr. Hansen stated that his first estimate for phase 2 is, drum roll please, this is for the grass fields, $430,000. Funding. At the June meeting, the mayor and council agreed to fund the phase 1 and phase 2 improvements to the Black River Fields. I invited anybody to read the council meeting minutes. I did not find that. Mr. Folch will reach out to the DEP regarding the potential for green acres funding and find out if that PIG money is still available for the township. Green, Mr. Dragg stated that he was in touch with Mike Nichols, the owner of Turf Nation, who expressed interest in assisting the township with the development of a design for the artificial turf field. This is June 7th. 2 days earlier, the engineer who was present at the meeting submitted the application that said it was only 5 grass field and no lights. The discussion ensued as who would receive the revenue for the naming rights, taxpayers, the nonprofit. Mr. Johnston suggested that revenue for the artificial turf field should go to the fund maintenance and replacement of the turf field. Mr. Johnston also suggested that each field be named individually. Again, we're talking artificial turf field and the revenue it's going to generate. Mr. Dragg noted that it's important to plan for the replacement of the artificial turf field. To establish a capital reserve fund as recommended by the town engineer. Mr. Johnson recommended dedicating user fees to fund the replacement. Mr. Folch asked about Turf Nation, whether they had a product, warranty. He was going to research that further. Mr. Johnston discussed the heat issue on the artificial turf field, which was raised as a concern, the alternatives, organic materials. Again, 2 days later, 5 grass fields, but this is the project as it's being formulated by the committee, with Mr. Hansen's participation. On 6/19, the council met. Mrs. Powell, who was a councilwoman at the time, voiced concern that the process was moving too quickly on the Black River Fields. Mayor Asdal noted that the purchase has been on the Parks Master Plan for many years and was previously held up by the school district's Sunderland Mississippi South. If the township does not purchase the fields this year, they will be sold to the private sector, which may mean reduced use of the fields. Mayor Asdal discussed an analysis sheet before regarding the ownership of Black River Fields, and she said that the risk versus reward came out in favor of purchasing. Again, I have reviewed all the minutes. I see no discussion of applying for open space money up to this time. Mr. Szymanski, and let me just elaborate on that for a second. Again, the open space money is to reimburse, so we're not paying for the whole price. Will we get 100% funding? Probably not. But Mr. Szymanski, before signing the contract for the Black River Fields, the township has an obligation to perform certain inspections, so on and so forth. Those inspections were ultimately performed, and we got past them, and as you know, the purchase went forward. Then on June 20th, the next Black River Subcommittee meeting, contract status update, the mayor who was present stated that the board has advised the contract with the requested amendments was approved at the meeting last night. In addition, last night, the mayor and council adopted an ordinance authorizing the signing of the contract. Mr. Hanson stated the health department has signed off on the parking lot expansion. They had no issue with respect to the existing septic. DEP is still reviewing the exemption application. Hanson reviewed the concept plan for phase 2, the natural turf fields, 2 450 by 450 areas. They can be rotated and adjusted depending on the type of sport you play. Mr. Hanson referred to questions about phase 2. We also know that the start is dependent on obtaining the Highlands exemption. They couldn't break ground until they had the exemption. Turning to the portions that contradict, again, this is June 20th, 15 days after the submission to the DEP for 5 grass fields, no light, no well. Mr. Reiner, who was the DPW superintendent, suggested running a electrical conduit under the parking area while it is under construction for the lighting of the turf field. Lights and turf. Lighting of the parking areas were suggested and would be necessary. Lighting and irrigation of the fields were discussed. Mr. Reiner suggested donations could be considered for conduits, lighting fixtures, and an electrician. The lighting of the grass fields was discussed. Both showed that lighting of the grass fields would require irrigation. Mr. Hanson, the no well application, Mr. Hanson, advised a second well would be needed if irrigation were required. Mr. Hanson suggested that the discussion with the sports team's representatives include lighting of the grass fields as well as parking. He noted that the Highlands exemption would include digging another well. I have to assume that's a misprint in the minutes. However, the impact of neighboring wells should be considered. Mr. Hanson suggested contacting Brian Drum. Mr. Dragg stated that Turf Nation is providing an estimate of $928,000 to build an artificial turf field. Here we are again. Mr. Hanson tells the DEP 5 grass fields, no well. Clearly not the case. Mr. Dragg indicated that the sports team's representatives were surprised by the cost of the artificial turf field and expressed hope that the township would assist with the cost. Representing Mr. Dragg's defense, he has clearly indicated on the record that that is not going to be the case. He believes 100%, if that were ever to happen, should be paid by the private sports teams. Mayor Asdell asked who would be in charge of soliciting for naming rights. Should be an avenue discussion with the sports teams. If the teams are fundraising for the turf field, they should receive the money from the naming rights. July 1st, the deal is set. The purchase is 48 months, July 1st, 2018 to June 30, 22. As I said, 2 one-year options after that. They can be had for $1 each. The whole point of that was extend the time frame so that the improvements could be completed while still owned technically by the school district. The payment schedule is at the bottom, $208,000, July 1st, 2018, and every July 1st thereafter through 2020. Intended buyer will make and pay entirely for any improvements. School district is chipping in nothing. If we go to the council meeting, immediately following, July 3rd. There is an authorization, a resolution to authorize signing the contract in that form. Mrs. Powell, again, to her credit, questioned if there's a deadline to work against. Mr. Moore, Councilman Moore at the time, stated that it is his understanding the township is purchasing the property as is, and Mayor Asno concurred that the school will not provide any recourse if any issues are found. Mrs. Powell believed that the township should still conduct its due diligence. 7/17. First installment is approved to go along with the contract. There's a resolution for a bond ordinance for $900,000 to help pay for it. Black River Field Subcommittee meets July 16th, July 18th. Natural turf fields are discussed. Artificial turf field is discussed. Again, we're just over 5 weeks since the 5 grass fields in the lab. Mayor Asno stated it was planned that this field would be as close to the street, ideal location for a lighted field. Here's a reference again, an artificial turf field would have to be paid for by the sports teams. Reference to the $200,000 to pay for the parking lot. So if you're keeping track, $830,000 to buy it, $200,000 for phase 1, $2.4 million for phase 2, and phase 3 is undecided. Cost of the artificial turf field is still in that 1.2 to 1.3 range at that time. There was a discussion with some of the sports teams representatives as to how they were going about doing it. Lighting, there was a discussion as to whether the natural turf field should also be lighted. Plan is to run a conduit. The anticipated cost would be $250,000 to $300,000. I will tell you in advance, the ultimate cost when we approved the $2.4 million came to $650,000 to $850,000 for lighting each field. The irrigation system will require upkeep and maintenance. Engineering report, Mr. Hanson advised the DEP forgot to publish notice of the Highlands exemption. Now the process is you send it to the DEP then the following month publishes notice that this is being considered by the DEP to give notice to anyone who might wish to object. They can get the application from the DEP or from the applicant, and they can review whether they want to enter any objections to the DEP. Now, if anybody had even looked, what were they going to get? 5 grass fields, no lights, no wells. That's what they would have gotten to object. The notice was going to instead be published in early August, and the 30-day public comment period would commence after that. The township would not receive notice until early September. Concern for drilling a new well of the natural turf fields. Mr. Hanson spoke to Byron Drilling, and they advised that a new well should not cause any issues for neighboring wells. Next up would be to contact an irrigation company. No details on how Byron Drilling came to that conclusion, but there it is. Mr. Hanson says that he's still preparing the cost estimate for phase 2. Remember, the first estimate, $430,000. Now, the end of July, Mayor Asdell said she'd be signing the lease purchase contract at noon that day, and the first annual payment will be paid that day. And there was an update that some of the sports teams were asking for at least one of the natural turf fields to be lit. Mr. Foltz confirmed that the irrigation of the lighted field would be necessary. The mayor asked what that also would be. Mr. Foltz stated he'd been in contact with an irrigation company, so on and so forth. He recommended both fields, natural turf fields, be irrigated as to the end use, recover better. There was more discussion of lighting. Foltz stated that one of the goals for the field lighting could light the parking lot as well. Discussion of how the lights would be turned on and off. And remember, June 5th, no lights. Mr. Hanson commented that the team seemed to be committing to providing funding. Township would then be responsible for the improvement of 2 natural turf fields, lighting of 1 field, and irrigation. At least that was the proposal. Mr. Hanson stated that he would start creating a timeline and cost for phase 2, working backwards from the latest installation date of the synthetic turf field. The mayor stated she would like to initiate discussion for providing the public with a process update, which would include putting information on the township website. Mr. Dragg stated some actual costs should first be determined so that there could be a discussion on how much the township is willing to spend. Mr. Hanson goes on to talk about installing conduits under the parking lot for lights later, and part of the phase 2 improvements. I've highlighted this portion because I think it raises some issues. I'll leave it to you to draw the conclusions. The subcommittee meetings can then be advertised. Going back to the prior page, what was being said was, the mayor has stated that she would like to create a Black River Fields tab on the website. Populated with agendas, minutes, and reports for public comment. Subcommittee meetings can then be advertised. They were not advertised until then. Mr. Dragg questioned whether this was too soon. Mr. Hanson noted that the project is still in the discovery phase. Mr. Foltz stated that it might be better to wait on posting minutes. Mr. Hanson suggested waiting until the timeline and all costs are determined, as most questions will be regarding those 2 items. Mr. Foltz suggested publishing the parking lot plan, thereby populating a phase 1 tab, with phase 2 and phase 3 tabs. Again, what we're talking about here is what will the public be told and when. Mayor stated the township was successful in the due diligence. This is the next council meeting. Any more questions from the public? and the bond ordinance was passed. Black River Subcommittee, August 21st. The lighting plan is being discussed again. Mr. Hanson talked to Mr. Fulch, contacted the irrigating, which include both turf fields for a total of 8 stanchions. Things through irrigation. More discussion, the mayor asking for criteria to assist the council in making a decision about lighting. One consideration is that the football, soccer, and regular practices go later, and that therefore they're limited by the amount of time of day. Parks Committee expressed some concerns about the synthetic turf field proposal and how it's to be funded. Mayor Asdell stated the question was whether approving funding committed the township to the installation of the field. So again, all of this is being discussed, but the DEP is still relying on the June 5th application. So this continues. I will skip ahead to October 2nd, 2018. There is a presentation to the council on what is proposed. What was proposed at that time. The mayor talks about the decision process she went through. Phase 1 was the parking lot, purchase of the fields, phase 1 construction. There is the site plan, 2 blocks with a 3rd section for where the proposed artificial turf will be. Installation of well and irrigation systems. Again, lights, well, DEP, 5 grass fields, no lights, no well. The estimated cost, $925,000 for phase 2. 430 to 925 to 2.4 million was the progression. The turf field and lights is estimated at $125 million at that time. Funding is said it will be private fundraising. Presentation only. I'll fast forward and I'll represent to you there's more. More talk while the DEP is sitting with something else. When I came on the council, when we were considering the bond, I started looking further into this, and I became disturbed on what I saw, particularly the application and how it was inconsistent with what was actually being proposed. We were proposing to float bonds. If we were floating bonds on an exemption that we obtained on 5 grass fields, no well, no lights, but we're proposing to do 2 grass fields, an artificial turf, and lights, I was a little uncomfortable with it. We raised the issue, it went in, we discussed it. I'm not going to go into the particulars of the discussion, but the outcome was eventually, we've got to go back to the DEP, clean this up. We went back to the DEP in June, had a meeting with the DEP, I was present at the meeting. The DEP indicated that some of the things were in a gray area, but they would go with it. We needed to submit, however, a revised site plan, since clearly 5 grass fields was not the project. So the DEP said, submit that, amend your application, and that should do it. They also said, leave off the artificial turf. If you want artificial turf, you will have to come back on another application for artificial turf. So by the time we went to the DEP in June, what had been approved was the $2.4 million for the 2 grass fields, no lights on the 2 grass fields. Phase 1 had already been approved. That was funded on a prior ordinance that was passed a long time ago. Phase 1 is complete. Phase 2 has not started yet. The bonds have not been floated yet. We recently just got the notice from the DEP. The plan was submitted. Now let's talk about that plan that was submitted. The plan that we took down to the DEP proposed the 2 grass fields, and it proposed a 3rd field there that was indicated to be the potential location of the artificial turf. Unfortunately, the way this resolves on the projector, we can't see the detail, but I've highlighted the sections. That's what the proposal was. The response at that meeting was June 20th with the DEP. They told us to go back and revise it. We revised it. After discussion at the council level, the agreement was, or what was submitted was, not necessarily by agreement, was that we would do the 2 grass fields and a 3rd grass field for phase 3. That's what's pending before the DEP. 2 large grass fields, a 3rd grass field, no lights. Because of the reevaluation of the irrigation needs and what would be needed, there have been additional wells proposed. We really don't know how many more wells are going to be needed because we don't know what the existing well is going to supply and what a new well might supply to cover up the difference and whether we'll need 2 more. The idea being potentially a well for each field. There was some testing done of wells in the neighborhood. I'll leave it to the people who were involved to discuss whether that's a good or a bad thing. There was testing done. The expert analyzed and said he thought that the existing wells probably would not be affected, but that was when we were talking about 1 additional well, not 3. So the whole thing is up in the air right now. Do we need 1 well? Do we need 3 wells? And if we need to go beyond 1 well, what is that potential impact going to be? There has been some back and forth. The DEP ultimately approved that exemption. We got the notice last Thursday. There is a 30-day period by which objectors can express objection to that, to the DEP. I'm not involved, I don't know, but I assume there's probably going to be some communication with the DEP. But as of right now, we have exemption 6. That's the first affirmation we've gotten since the meeting in June, because then we then applied in early September, and the DEP has now gotten back to us and said, yes, 2 big grass fields, 1 smaller grass field, no lights, additional wells. We will approve that for exemption number 6. You can go forward, Township, and start working on that. If we want to change phase 3 to artificial turf and lights, or add lights anywhere along the way, we are going to need to go back for a new application, because that changes the project. Again, going back to that June 5th, we've now gotten to what should have been submitted for the exemption. Why it was submitted in June, I don't know. Why it was submitted with 5 grass fields, I'm still trying to find out. But that's the progression of what happened with Black River Fields. So we now appear to be moving forward with it. That's all I can tell you about Black River Fields. Not that that wasn't enough, right?
Can I correct a few of your statements for that?
At the end.
What about the usage? Wasn't there something about who was using using?
Could you speak up, please?
Yeah, what's the question, Jim?
Wasn't there something about who was using the fields on those exemptions? Who was,
Not that I'm aware of. I know the usage was estimated at about 17% for the fields.
no, the local students?
Pardon?
Like, was it used by local students versus sports teams?
We can address that at the end if you want. As far as finances, there was a question that I received. I'll read it to you. My projector seems to have calmed down. The 2019, where is the current budget with regard to revenue and expenditures? What is our current debt? How has it changed? How does it impact the budget? 2019 budget is $14,770,000. Current debt issued is $8,680,000. General debt, $1,755,000. Open space debt. Our current debt authorized but not issued is another $1.4252 million. And general debt and $2.7 million in open space debt. That $2.7 million is by and large the improvements for Black River. Due to the way the state recognizes debt when it is authorized, our amount increased in 2017, decreased in 2018, and increased in 2019. Our debt currently represents approximately 11.94% of our overall budget. I will upload, there is the budget, the entire budget. If anybody really wants to dig into the numbers, that will be part of the download documents, as well as the 2018 audit, if anybody is really a numbers maven and really wants to get serious about digging into how that works.
Before we run out of time for everybody,
Yep.
can we please hear from Derek and Tim, what they have to say?
I'm almost finished, and then we will turn it over. So there's the answer. Unfortunately, it doesn't slim down, but those are the numbers. If anybody is interested in the numbers on the finance, again, I'm really not the guy. If you have a finance question particular to what's going on, what I would suggest you do is email it to me. I will pass it by our chief financial officer and get back to you with an answer. So we've covered Black River, we've covered the lawsuits, we've covered Delaware, we've covered finances.